You're listening to the Better for America podcast, presented by Amac, the Association of Mature American Citizens.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rebecca Weber, and this is your Amac podcast, Better for America. Joining me today is Dr. Jon Spiers. Now, Dr. Spiers is a real friend, a thoughtful and courageous, extraordinarily well-informed American who recently spent time with Amac and with me personally and our Amac team at the U.S. southern border in Del Rio, Texas. Now, for the 2.4 million AMAC members listening, and for all of you listening and watching, I want to say that the border crisis could become the crisis of the century. This is an irreversible turn for the worst that we had a chance to correct. That is, the administration had a chance to correct, to stop, but somehow the Biden administration does not understand well enough to stop it. Put differently, folks, this is a real crisis. This is not a joke, and this is not a talking point. Now, on the border, we learned of lawbreakers, inhumanity, and a political tragedy, all the result, in my opinion, of the Biden administration's failed policies. They are encouraging open borders. Now, we know that illegal aliens are swarming north with children. We know that drugs are trafficked in mass quantities, which have killed over 100,000 young Americans in the past 12 months alone. And we saw how our Border Patrol and other, border officials are really, truly overwhelmed. Dr. Jon Spiers saw human beings who were branded by cartels like cattle. And he'll tell us more about that. But folks, all of this is the result of an indefensible, indifferent, and devastating Biden policies that are feeding the traffic cartels and condemning young women to victimization and sex trafficking, killing and wounding many, increasingly endangering everyday Americans, their property, their homes, their lives, and their security. In short, the travesty of the Southwest border is a real issue. It is affecting every state, and it is unconscionable. This policy is not legally defensible and is weighing on the nation as few fully understand, which is why I'm so glad to have our guest with us today, Dr. Jon Spiers. He is one who really does understand. He has lived through this nightmare. He lives it now, trying to help manage the devastating consequences created by the Biden White House and Democrats in Congress. By way of background, Dr. Spiers is not only a friend of AMAC, but his depth knowledge, he's a heart surgeon, an attorney, a veteran, and an entrepreneur. He's a former Duke football player and is part of the Army Reserve Medical Corps and is uncompromising in his principles. Dr. Spiers is running for Texas Land Commissioner. He is first and foremost a great American. Dr. Spiers, welcome. Thank you for joining me today.
I'm very glad and privileged to join you today to talk about especially such an important topic.
It is an important topic, and it's a tough one because many folks that are listening, they don't really, they're not entirely aware. I'll be honest, I was not entirely aware of really how bad the situation is until I went down there. If you could you paint us a picture of what is currently happening at the southern border in Texas specifically? Help us understand, how is Texas managing this crisis?
Well, if you use the term crisis, is actually probably an understatement. It's more like some sort of border apocalypse. We have folks that are coming across illegally. We have folks that are certainly seeking asylum or looking for a better life, but they're doing it the wrong way. On the other hand, we have a lot of folks that are coming into the country intentionally illegally so that they can take advantage of our lax border policy and bring in, as you mentioned, drugs or can participate in human trafficking. And so when you look in Texas, what we're seeing right now, there are thousands upon thousands of people coming across the border. Just earlier, I was reviewing some statistics. In just the last month alone, there have been almost, not quite, 300,000 apprehensions along the entire southern border, stretching from San Diego all the way down to the Gulf Coast. In that area, of course, we also talk about the gotaways. We divide these intentionally. The apprehensions are folks, either they come across, turn themselves in, or we just happen to catch them there at the border as they're trying to come in. Many of them claim to be seeking asylum. Let's talk about those in a moment. Then there's the group that are the gotaways. And this is a group that there's a lot of argument over how many there really are there. In this past month, there were almost 90,000 that we know, that we have reasonable belief, we have supporting evidence that got away, vanished into the American heartland. Now, what's troubling about this is the way we calculate the gotaways. You ask a Border Patrol agent to come in at the end of a long shift where they're exhausted, and they have to fill out some detailed records and then make an estimate that they can support for how many got away. Well, let's think about that. You have to have some basis for saying this person got away, how many got away. In reality, we don't know how many got away. So that they say 90,000. Well, that's based on some evidence that, they may or may not have been able to gather fully. Whereas the number's probably larger, maybe twice as many. Because what's your goal if you're someone trying to sneak in illegally? Not to leave any trace. That's the goal there. And what are these folks that come in that we count as gotaways? These are folks that know there's probably not a way they're going to get into the United States otherwise. These are the folks that are drug traffickers, gang members, sex traffickers. These are particularly bad characters. They're very often single men. They're very often well-trained in military arts. Some of them come in wearing camouflage uniforms even so that they can blend in. On their cell phone, we are rarely seen without our cell phone. They have maps telling them where to go to find a place to hide, where to go to recharge their phone, to find food, to get water, and to wait for the next transport that they're going to take, whether that's a train or some American citizen who has just been inveigled into this scheme, offered a few hundred, maybe a few $1,000s to pick someone up and transport them into the heartland. And I think that's what we really need to focus on, is that word, the heartland. No one comes to the United States illegally to stay at Del Rio or El Paso or Brownsville or McAllen. They come into the United States illegally so that they can go to Chicago or New York or Virginia or California, who knows. They're coming into the heartland to move away from the border. And so what they bring with them, whether it's drugs or violence or sex trafficking, that travels far away. And that's just a horrifying thought. And I think that's why most of your viewers need to recognize that when they ask, where's the problem at the southern border? All of us who have seen it, and I know you will agree, the problem's out your rear door, out your front door, out your back door, out your kitchen door. The problem is in your neighborhood.
Yeah. And now when we were down there, we were informed, and you heard it too, that the cartels have operational control of the borders. Can you explain to those folks who are listening, what does that really mean, that these cartels have operational control? Can you expand on that statement that we heard?
Sure. First of all, I'm not trying to downplay the role that our brave men and women who are trying to serve the United States and protect the United States play. On the southern side, the cartels are in control of every aspect of life. If you want to come into the United States from Mexico, first of all, you pay the cartels for the privilege to come to the United States. They decide when you're going to cross, where you're going to cross, and as part of that equation, how they're going to use you when you cross. Take, for example, when we have a large migrant surge, an immigrant surge, what does the cartel understand, the cartel operating in that particular area? They understand that all of our resources are going to be focused in a particular area. So if we're all looking at a particular bridge or a group of people under a bridge, they're going to traffic folks far away from that, out of sight of our border patrol, out of sight of law enforcement. And what are they bringing in? They're bringing in particularly bad people, particularly bad substances. You mentioned drugs earlier. That's so easy to bring across the border now. In the past, much of our drug traffic that we know about, and that's always the key, that we know about, would come through our land ports of entry. Places like Laredo, there was a lot of drug traffic through there. But now that we are spread so thin on the border and our Border Patrol agents are babysitting or processing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of illegals, the border's wide open. They can, well, as you saw, we could have walked into Mexico and walked back and no one would have said a word where we were. And that's what happens. It's not going to get better unless we actually look at what we can do in Mexico to stop this.
Must be stopped. And for folks that are listening, many people have great compassionate hearts and do care about these people, especially the families that are coming over with young children. And I applaud folks that have a compassionate heart, but we've got to make sure that it's not misplaced, that we understand who it is that's coming over. So, for example, Dr. Spiers, you and I were together. We were there right along the Rio Grande. We could see how easy it was to move from Mexico right over to the shores of the United States, right on the U.S. soil, right there. We saw that the property that they left behind, the clothing and other trash that they left behind. And we saw a woman with a young toddler. It appeared to be a young toddler. And someone like this young woman and her child, I suspect, would want to be caught when they're coming over. So they would sort of come over and recognizing I'll probably get caught. And can you explain to folks why someone would be so bold to say, let me walk over with my children and hope that someone does stop me? What is the fate of that mother and her children, for example, in this example?
Well, that's one of the exploits that they use. Women and children or family units are often just granted asylum and allowed into the United States. But the problem for these folks is they're not entering the United States legally. And what so many folks, when they are sympathetic, and frankly, let's be honest, all of us are sympathetic to their plight. But what we have to do is decide, are we going to act based on, make a decision of convenience, or are we going to make a decision of conscience? It's convenient to say, just let them all in. We don't have to work, just let them all in. And to some folks, that seems to be the logical answer. But in reality, when you just let people into the United States and they are not only pathway to citizenship, they are not here legally, then they will never enjoy all the rights and privileges that you and I do. I want these folks that, like the young woman we saw with her child, I want them to come to the United States legally. And if they come legally, then they can stand up, hold their head high. They don't have to constantly look over their shoulder and wonder, not so much about United States law enforcement coming to get them, because that's what many people think. Oh, they're always on the run from US law enforcement. No, if they come here illegally, courtesy of one of the cartels that they pay thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to for the right to enter our country, that cartel forever has them in their grasp. Forever, that person, that woman and that child may be looking over their shoulder, not for our law enforcement, not for Border Patrol, but for the cartel saying, hey, do you remember that time we got you into the United States? We have one other favor to ask of you, just one, and one becomes two, and two becomes three. And these sums of money that are paid to the cartels by these folks, the average person crossing the border may not have $8,000. And you think, gosh, how do they arrange it? Some of them can borrow it from family that's here in the United States already illegally. But many, if not most, strike a deal. I will go to the United States. I know that I owe you, cartel, a large sum of money. I will work it off. How do these women work that money off? It's horrifying. How do children work that off? Now, so many folks think that, gosh, that can't happen in the United States. But let's look at the city of Houston. Houston is one of the largest cities in the United States. Many people think it's not on the border. I disagree. In the city of Houston, it seems at times that you can, just everywhere you look, there's going to be a Starbucks coffee shop. Did you know there are more brothels in the city of Houston than there are coffee shops? And that's a staggering, staggering number. You drive down the street and count the number of Starbucks coffee shops you see and think, for every one that I see, there are a dozen, 2 dozen young women, perhaps even children, that have been sold into sexual bondage. And that's, well, I don't see how anyone can be sympathetic with that. That's why we need to take a stand. Do it legally. Come to the United States legally. Enjoy all the benefits and responsibilities of being a United States citizen. Otherwise, you have to live in the shadows, and no one wants that.
That's right. And so what we need to understand then, and just to reiterate what you're saying here, is that for the folks that are coming over and being picked up, being, and intentionally so, because they know that they will be granted asylum and be sort of shipped somewhere for a time being, those folks, what we're saying essentially is that there's someone else that they're indebted to. It's the reason why they likely were able to make it over. And in aiding and abetting sort of that sort of behavior is what we're doing when we turn a blind eye and just try to, shuffle these people through and somehow fit them in society. These drug cartels, the issue is greater than most people are aware. I had no idea that there are situations and have been cases where individuals have been branded or marked, tattooed by the drug cartels. Explain a little bit more about that. Expand on that if you could. What do you know of that? Because I think that's quite interesting for people to understand that this is really a form of modern day slavery.
It is just de facto modern day slavery. I remember when I was a little bit younger, I was working in one of our busier trauma centers here in the state of Texas. And one night, this woman comes in and she's in dire straits. The staff in the emergency room are incredibly well trained, and they recognized they'd seen it before. They knew exactly what was going on. She had swallowed numerous packets of cocaine. One of them had ruptured, and she was going to die within minutes. We rushed her off to surgery, and we were fortunate we were able to save her life. In the emergency room while she was there was a fellow who was just kind of watching to see what was happening to her. He paid a great deal of attention to what was going on with her. And the moment she was wheeled back and the nurses asked if he could come, did he want to come back with her? No, he didn't. He left. Later, when she's recovering, we noticed several things. One, she had a brand on her breast. And I asked the nurses if they had seen that before. And the answer was sadly, yes, we see it often. What does it represent? She is owned by, and they named the particular cartel, owned by a cartel. And she had lost their cocaine. Obviously, we had to turn it over to the police. The police were interrogating her, but she had to repay that debt some way. I remember seeing her. She looked like a wild animal, just constantly on edge, looking every time a door would open or she'd hear a sound in the hallway. She was worried that they were coming for her. I asked some of the law enforcement agents what would have happened to her. They said, well, if she had died outside the hospital, the cartel would have gutted her to get their drugs. And now what fate awaited her? Well, she had to pay the cartels probably $1 million or more for the drugs that she had lost. You see, they had interest in trouble and expense for their trouble because she didn't serve them as they needed. And in the end, ultimately, her life is essentially forfeit. There's no way we could hide her. They'll find her. That happens over and over and over again. It's not unusual.
Boy, it really does break my heart. Now, just a few weeks ago, Biden's Secretary of Homeland Security, Mayorkas, he said during testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee, when asked by Lindsey Graham how he would grade himself on immigration, Secretary Mayorkas responded, "I'm a tough grader on myself, and I give myself an A for effort and investment in mission and support." What is your reaction?
There's an old saying that no matter how elegant your plan may be, occasionally you have to look at results, because results are how you're graded, not on effort, not on support, and not on well wishes. I think Secretary Mayorkas, well, he's grading on a curve, But let's face it, and when it comes to actually doing the job, he gets an F, and he's got to repeat this grade. This is terrible. I mean, that's a joke.
Yeah. I mean, he also said rebuilding broken immigration systems takes a lot of time, he said, and we're on the road to success. But we know the numbers tell a very different story. According to the official data, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, the CBP, they say that they encountered 164,303 illegal migrants at the southern border in October alone. This means that the number of migrants apprehended at the border in October skyrocketed by over 128% from the same time last year. And those are just the ones who got caught, as you explained, Dr. Spiers. Can you share with those listening what tools and tactics are being used to try to catch those that don't want to be caught? And are these tactics working? Are our men and women that are there on the front lines, do they have the support, as Mayorkas claims he provides, in order to get the job done? Clearly not. But tell us what they're doing that's at least helping.
It's so frustrating. And I couldn't help but chuckle as you were describing all of this. First of all, I think the numbers are a gross underestimate. I think it's closer to 300,000 as far as apprehensions. We'll have to wait and see if ever we do get a true number. But the tools that the men and women are using are limited right now as far as the Border Patrol goes, because they're spending so much time actually processing people into the United States. Because let's remember, we were supposed to turn folks back to the Wade in Mexico protocols, the migrant protection protocols. And this government has refused to actually enforce this as they were ordered by the Supreme Court. They've offered up a host of excuses, but they just have never delivered. They don't intend to. Let's face it. They are breaking the law. They're defying the Supreme Court, and they're not serving the people. Now, the tools that are available are many. Walls work. Now, let's be honest. Someone can always get over a wall. Someone can always go around a wall. Someone can go through a wall. They can go under a wall. Walls are not perfect. They're one element in the process, but they do slow somebody down. If you were out to try to climb a 12-foot wall, it's not easy, even with a ladder. Carrying someone with us, carrying our belongings with us. If you had a child, it's not easy, but we don't have a wall everywhere. So what we're using right now, the state of Texas has just recognized they have to step up and take the burden on themselves. And our governor has ordered our National Guard down to the border. Because they were activated by the governor, they can act in ways that they could not if they were activated by the federal government. It's just part of the way the National Guard works. They're working in a support role for our law enforcement officers. While the Border Patrol is occupied and limited in their tasks, basically punching tickets at the order of Mr. Biden and Mr. Mayorkas, what our law enforcement agents are doing are stepping up to try to fill the void and protect Texas citizens. Our legislature and our governor stepped up and recognized that if someone is trespassing on private property here in Texas, we actually have a cause of action. We can arrest them for trespassing. Now, we have to work in conjunction with the federal government. And if they are women with children, we're actually going to wind up giving them to the Customs and Border Protection. They're going to process them, and they may well release them into the United States. But in Texas, we actually we see if we can get them prosecuted by one of the regional attorneys. Now, there are many ways we can find these folks. This is what's interesting, because our technology here in the United States is second to none. We could, if we had the will, tell exactly who's coming into the United States. We can use heat sensors, pressure pads. We have drone technology. We can find people. I have been out at night with night vision goggles, infrared goggles, been out with thermal imaging, and you can just see people marching into the United States. Now, our DPS, the Texas Department of Public Safety, uses their technology to try to track these folks down when they're crossing private property. And let's face it, when they cross private property, these are not folks that want to be apprehended. These are folks that are trying to escape into the United States and do bad things. Why is that bad? Why is that bad for the person at the border? For the men and women who carve out their life on the border, who may have been there for a long time, who are living through tough winters, droughts, hot summers, trying to make a living, to not be able to go outside and empty their trash, to travel in pairs, to always carry a weapon with them, to keep their kids inside, kids that used to be able to play and enjoy the wonderful Texas outdoors. They keep them inside and locked away. They're constantly in fear for their lives. To imagine you're washing dishes or just getting ready to go to work in the morning and you look out the window to see what the weather's like, and they're looking back at you. It's not one pair of eyes, but half a dozen folks on your porch looking in, looking at you. Or you get home at the end of the day and they're sitting on your porch as a gentleman all tattooed up with all the markings of someone in MS, MS-13.
13.
And they're there on your porch. I mean, it's not the way for an American to have to live. No one should.
And this
have
is
to live that
real.
way.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
this is real, and we know that. Amac was there. We spent some time with Amac members that have a ranch that covers thousands of acres, and they've got this problem. It's a real problem, and it's a reason why our Second Amendment right is so important. We need to be able to defend ourselves, our life, and our property. But boy, Biden and Democrats in the Congress, they are working to push through the Build Back Better Act, which just passed in the House. And the current version of the bill includes numerous immigration provisions that would, among other things, provide mass amnesty, allow illegal immigrants to receive taxpayer funding, government benefits, even child tax credits. Now, add to this Biden's promise of $450,000 for migrants separated from their families after illegally crossing the U.S. And the result is an immigration policy that only incentivizes more illegal crossings, not fewer. Do Biden, Harris, Mayorkas, and the rest of the current administration realize the effects of their policies? That the American people consider this a dismal failure? Or, in your opinion, do they really just not care?
That's the old question. Are they ignorant or apathetic or both? I think they have to know that their policies are going to encourage folks to come to the United States illegally. They have to know that. They don't seem to care. And that tells me that it's part of an organized, coordinated strategy to just overwhelm us. You know, the state of Texas has long had a sense that we were in the sights of the federal government, particularly because, well, we're Texans. We stand up for what we believe in. We say what we think, and we're not afraid to think outside the box. In fact, I tell folks that we're just too big to fit in the box. But, you know, they've got such an organized, coordinated plan to allow us to be overrun. And what they are doing is denigrating the rights of the men and women, the legacy and heritage of the men and women who came here legally. You know, down on our southern border, down here in Texas, when I talk to folks who have immigrated into the United States, done it legally, gone through the process, they are incredibly proud of what they've done. They wear it like a badge of honor. And they're heartbroken that the president is denigrating what they've done. He's taking all of their achievements and all that they've built, and he's saying, well, too bad for you that you were dumb enough to do it the right way. We're going to give it away, and we're going to give people a lot of money to do it. We're going to encourage people to break the law. Well, shame on you, Mr. Biden. These folks are not going to tolerate that. And he thinks, and his administration thinks that, oh, because along our border, we have a lot of Hispanic citizens, a lot of folks that have come here the right way. He thinks, oh, they'll be sympathetic to what we've done. In reality, they're very upset because they have done all the right things. And what Biden's policies have done, he's attacked the oil and gas industry. He's attacked law enforcement. He's just, what he's done with our military is terrible. And let's look at what these folks do. These folks are very pro-life. They're very conservative in their social views. They are proud to serve in the military. They're proud to work in law enforcement. They're proud that they work in the oil and gas industry. Well, he's just attacked them. And so they're recognizing that this democratic leadership And I hate to use that word because it's not leadership at all. But what he has done is he's encouraged them to consider other options. He's put them in jeopardy because, see, the cartels don't care. They don't look at you and say, oh, this person is Hispanic, we shouldn't do harm to them. They don't care. The cartels will use and abuse anyone, you, me, anyone. It doesn't matter. And there's a reason that here in Texas, when you look at our Border Patrol stations, where are these stations located? Okay, if you get your map out and you look at a place called Dallas, you've heard of it. There's a Border Patrol station there in Dallas. There's one in Midland. These are places that are hours away from the border, hours away. And what are we seeing? People moving into the United States all through these areas. You know, they come through Houston, they come through San Antonio, they go through Dallas, they go through Midland, they go through Odessa. They go from there to a town near you, to your neighborhood. And what they're bringing is not peace, love, and joy. Let's face it.
Thank God we've got, it seems anyway, that the morale certainly is still high among these brave men and women that are doing such a wonderful job with the limited resources that they have. Certainly not enough. They don't have the backing and the help from the administration, and they're really going out of their way to make sure that the residents that live along the border are safe and sound, and providing them with an easy way to be notified if in fact they do have trouble on their private property. But it's heartbreaking when you do see how hard they work. And, we saw these young, brave men that were showing us this sea wire. Did you have an opportunity to check out the new sort of, I guess you could call it new, they're looking to put this barbed wire up along certain areas to try to deter people. But like you said earlier, I mean, these things, they can help, but it's not really the answer. We need a coordinated effort, and we need real leadership, and we're not seeing that right now. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, and one of the advantages one of the tools that we've recognized has worked really well, because many of these ranches have a lot of game on them. People hunt there, and so if we look back over time, these men and women who operate these ranches were starting to see people appear on their game cameras, whereas normally they'd see deer or coyote or whatnot, a four-legged coyote.
Right.
And so that really alerted a lot of the citizenry to the problem before the government admitted it was there. And then they began to notice that fences were being cut. And these are not inexpensive fences. People say, oh, it's just a fence. These are not inexpensive fences. And the livestock that they contain are not inexpensive. So they're cutting these fences, and often they'll cut one, and then 20 feet later, the next group through will cut that fence. But that aside, so we started to see these large number of folks coming through, and men and women started to notice that their power lines were tapped, or their water lines were tapped or damaged. And so they were constantly having to repair things. These add up. It becomes thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. And they were constantly trying to repair this. Well, as they've come across, more and more of the local communities had to step up and say, hey, look, we can't tolerate this. And I don't want to name names because I think the sheriffs there have done such a great job. But I was just talking to one today, and he was describing how they have had their citizenry step up and actually go the extra mile to avoid confrontation, how they've actually gone out of their way to try to stay away from the trouble, but at the same time, protect what is theirs. And that's the challenge, because we don't want anyone to lose their life in this matter. And what we're afraid of is that some of the particularly bad actors coming across, sooner or later, some of these people are going to act out of just malice, and someone's life's going to be lost. And I just rue that day. I hate to even think about that. But that is what our government, by condoning this lawlessness, has set up. And
It is exactly right. Yeah, and the administration officials, they're safe in their high-rise DC apartments, And Americans who live in border towns and law enforcement officials throughout the country are really left to contend with what has already become an unmitigated disaster. So one way or another, with the midterm elections now less than a year away, Biden and congressional Democrats will have to answer, I hope, for this destruction, these destructive policies, because they have really caused a great deal of turmoil. I have two final questions for you, Dr. Spiers. I want to touch on these charitable organizations that I've heard are up buying some hotels and housing illegals and helping them assimilate into the U.S. For example, perhaps giving tips on how to get through, TSA without identification. So these are, as I understand it, some charitable organizations, and I'm not sure which ones they are, that are literally buying these hotels in order to help process these folks. But I wonder, is this a money grab by certain organizations? How do you see this, really? I mean, are these charitable organizations in the long haul doing the right thing and doing the ultimate good?
Well, whenever you try to make a sweeping generalization, you need to realize that not everyone fits into this mold. But what we have seen are there certain organizations that seem to be profiting greatly from this. They receive money from generous donors who feel that, hey, I'm actually going to do some good work. I'm going to give this organization some money to help settle people here in the United States and help them deal with the hardships that they face. It's not always the case. That money may not actually get to where you intended to go. And so these organizations, some of them look and say, hey, look, we're making a good profit. We're making money, although they claim to be a nonprofit. We're receiving more and more funds the more and more people we process. And so they actually subsidize, they really encourage it. Just come here. And this is the way we'll get you here. And they actually allow maps and pins on some of the travelers' maps, as we call it, when they get their cell phone and they share a map on Google. And it says, this is the place you need to go and ask for sister so-and-so. This is where you need to go to get money. This is where you need to go to get into the United States. This is where you need to go to be transported to New York or Chicago or you name it. And so they've worked out a way. People make a lot of money off of it. And we also need to recognize when people say, oh gosh, I'm just going to give someone a job here in my community. Let's say they live in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and they say, I'm going to hire somebody to do some repair work on my home, or I'm going to hire somebody to do some housework for me, or to just any job. And they don't check to see if they're allowed to work in the United States. They don't confirm that they're here legally. They're underwriting it too. They're actually encouraging it. And that's terrible. Now, you may think, gosh, this is just one person and they seem so nice. They seem so nice. How could they be terrible? Well, recently I was down at the border and a group of gentlemen were apprehended by DPS, and they began to speak with them and to discuss what was their motivation for coming here. And these men said, oh, we're just looking for work. We're struggling to survive in Mexico. We're just looking for work. And we are trying to get, and they named a city, and our friends and family have sent us money so we can get there because we're just so poor. DPS checked to see who these men were. Sex trafficker, wanted across the United States, considered armed and dangerous. So he doesn't look any different from someone who might approach you at say Home Depot or Lowe's saying, I just need to work. But in reality, it's a very bad guy, a group of very bad people. And that story repeats itself over and over and over again. And by hiring them, thinking that you're doing something that's good and kind, or supporting a charity that's encouraging them to come here, or printing maps. Some of these charities print maps and distribute them throughout Central and through Mexico and Central America, even South America, telling people how to get here, where to stop, how long it'll take, what to bring, the questions to ask, numbers to call. Those things, they're just encouraging a problem that well, our federal government doesn't have any intent of doing anything about right now.
So, Dr. Spiers, I do want to speak about what we call the transnational criminal organizations, these TCOs. Now, we know that the United States faces a growing transnational global threat as these narco cartels and gangs exploit problems. We know that the US has a growing illicit drug problem. We know it's caused in part by prescription regulations. But we see that these pharma communities are actually creating conditions that are exacerbating the problem. Now, when we were there on Amac members' ranch, we actually came upon this bag of what appeared to be baking flour, a white floury substance. And we all, being wise, said, let's not fool with it. Let's not touch it because we don't know what's in that bag. Could have been cocaine. We don't know. But the authorities were notified. And there was a lot of junk around that area. So I want to ask you to elaborate a little bit more on the issue of drugs and what this really means for America.
First of all, you did the exact thing you should have done. Just get away from it. We have seen, unfortunately, many folks in law enforcement, many unsuspecting citizens who have actually touched some of these drugs. And if it's something like fentanyl or carfentanil, either one of those, it's tragic. They could succumb to the effects of the drug. What you saw, very likely, was someone who's just transporting drugs here to the United States. We used to think that the only thing that came from Mexico was marijuana. And then folks started saying, hey, maybe it's heroin. But you know, the cartels are not dumb guys. They're bad guys, but they're not dumb. They recognize that there are other things they can bring into the United States which offer greater profit. So what did they turn their attention to? Well, the Chinese nationals would manufacture precursor drugs for fentanyl. And so the cartels actually just hired really skilled chemists, and there are a lot of them, to turn these precursor drugs into fentanyl. It's very easily done. And so they would take that and they try to bring it into the United States. Sometimes they bring just pure fentanyl into the United States. The other thing that they do exceptionally well is manufacture methamphetamine. Now, everyone has seen Breaking Bad and they think that methamphetamine is cooked in hotel rooms or abandoned buildings and by folks that are kind of shady at best. Well, the cartels are certainly shady, but they hire top flight chemists to manufacture the methamphetamine. And often they will leave it in a liquid form to bring into the United States. So when it comes to the United States, they'll transport it into the United States in liquid form and then crystallize it so it becomes crystal meth at that point. There's another thing that they do that's even more sinister. You know, yes, we have a prescription drug problem here in the United States. And so many unsuspecting and misguided folks think, hey, if I buy a pill on the street and it looks just like this pill I've taken before, surely I know what's going to happen. And that's, well, it's foolish. They think it's safe. What the cartels did is they went out and purchased a bunch of pill making machinery so that they will take fentanyl and some other drug or some other neutral inactive substrate and mix them together so that it looks like a pill that you might purchase off the street that's maybe, while it's illegal, it's the real deal. They make it look just like that. What they do that's even more sinister, because they recognize that fentanyl is potentially lethal and methamphetamine is potentially lethal, they have different effects that somewhat offset each other. The cartels, again, being clever but bad people, say, hey, let's put them both into a pill. So now you have fentanyl, which could depress your respiration and lead to death, and an amphetamine that's going to rev you up. You mix them together, and they do it with some reason. They have carefully calculated what they can do. So now they give you one pill. They call it the good whatever, the good OxyContin. We're going to say the good OxyContin. Well, the good OxyContin is not good. It's particularly bad because you're being addicted to two drugs at that time. They make synthetic fake Adderall They just make fake almost anything, and they sell it on the streets. You know, I joke that people that still think the cartels like to sell heroin, well, the cartels don't have a green movement. They've moved away from plant-based stuff, things they can completely control from start to finish, like fentanyl. And thus far, there's been enough fentanyl to come across our borders that it would kill every man, woman, and child in the United States. Think about that.
That is
Enough to kill everyone.
unbelievable. You know, yeah, I mean, people need to think about it. People need to just imagine it, because it's real. This is a real threat. And thank God that we've got folks that are catching this, or at least some of it. We don't know how many people are getting away. And we need to be reminded that more people died in the year 2021 so far than people passing away in 19 and 20 from these drugs. More people in 2021. And so shame on Joe Biden for turning a complete blind eye. Shame on Kamala Harris for not taking her job as border czar seriously. Shame on Mayorkas for not understanding the real numbers, the statistics, or caring enough to learn what's really going on. Dr. Spiers, I've got one more question for you. You're running for Texas Land Commissioner. Can you tell us what motivated you to run and why you believe you're the best candidate for the job? AMAC's got well over 200,000 members in Texas, and they're going to love to hear what you have to say about that.
Well, I appreciate that. You know, what I love about Texas is that almost anything is possible. And so many years ago, a young general surgeon who had done some work as a trauma surgeon, who had actually received some honors that way, who had joined the Army Reserve and had served as a surgeon during the first Gulf War, never went abroad, never left Texas. But I was able to come here and become a heart surgeon, trained with Dr. DeBakey. And I thought that was the greatest thing in the world. But fast forward a few years and I was injured, lost the use of my left hand. And, you know, it doesn't take any leap of the imagination to recognize that nobody really needs a one-handed heart surgeon. And so as I recovered and worked hard to recover the motion in my hand, I got to where I could tie my shoes, but I realized I wasn't going to be able to continue. So I went to law school, and that's where I picked the lawyer part up on my resume. And in law school, I recognized that what most people think the law says and what the law does are very different. Like so many folks, I became more and more active in politics. And as time went on, I recognized that my love for the state of Texas and the people of Texas, with what I had learned and done as a Texan, would allow me to serve Texas going forward. Here in Texas, we're blessed to have 13 million acres that is owned by the state of Texas. We retained all of our public lands when we joined the union. We use that to help educate our kids. We also protect and serve our veterans. We have care homes for when they're in particular need. We have veteran cemeteries as well that we honor our dead here. We make lands available to them for purchase, funding available to support their purchases. So we like to honor our veterans. As someone who served in the Army Reserve in the past, I love to help our veterans. I have great respect for those men and women. We also manage things like our beaches. We manage the lands beneath our waterways, like the Rio Grande. And we also, this is very important, help with disaster recovery. So why does someone who spent a lot of time in the educational system appreciate education? Why does someone who served in our military appreciate veterans? Why does someone who spent his legal career fighting administrative overreach? And why does someone who's been through disasters feel like they should fit in the land office? Well, that's what the land office does. And that's why I think I'm the best candidate for that. Most of all, though, what I tell people is that we have to find the courage to reach down deep inside of us and find that part of us that harkens back to Davy Crockett or William Travis or Sam Houston, that willingness to do not what's easy, but to do the hard things that have to be done. When people say, oh, we've done everything we can. Well, I have news for you. In Texas, there's always one more thing you can try. And that's what I'm bringing to this race. So I'm thrilled to be here with you. Appreciate the chance to talk on this topic. You know, we could talk about the challenges facing Texas and facing our United States over and over and over again and still not cover all the topics. But this one issue, the problem at our southern border, is a challenge that we must address if we hope to remain a nation. A nation must have borders. We must have security. Our citizens deserve to be safe in their homes, to have confidence that the government is there to protect them. You know, someone once said, if you leave people to fend for themselves, eventually they will, and you won't like it. God bless Texas.
Amen. Very well said, Dr. Spiers. Thank you so much for being with us today. And to all of you listening, thank you for tuning in. I want to thank our AMAC members for renewing your AMAC membership. For $16 a year, you gain access to steep discounts, money-saving member benefits, and you'll also receive our bi-monthly AMAC magazine delivered directly to your mailbox and included in your membership. If you haven't downloaded the AMAC News app, you can watch and listen to today's podcast, plus track breaking news. Go ahead and download the AMAC News app on your smartphone. And please make sure to hit that subscribe button, follow, like, and share wherever you are on social media. Until next time, folks, I'm Rebecca Weber. This is your podcast, Better for America. Thank you for being here. God bless you. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Better for America podcast. To learn more about AMAC and all it has to offer, visit us at www.amac.us.